Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Liz Foreman Show and to part 3 of our Shadow series. Before we dive in, I want to make something really clear. When we talk about shadow, we're not here to dwell on it, to get stuck in it, to obsess, or even give it a label, right? We are here to use the idea of this human design chart as our highest potential, as that blueprint that can highlight all of the strengths that are already within us. But with that potential, there are going to be patterns that are going to be conditioned, and they're often unconscious, and they can hold us back. Shadow work simply is about shining a light on those patterns so that we can see them for what they are. They're really just kind of outdated ways of thinking or feeling or behaving. And they've kept us safe. But now they're probably limiting us in our growth. So this work, looking at the shadow, this isn't about judging yourself or fixing something that's broken. Like that's not going to be the focus of this episode. Really, shadow work is about self-investigation. It's about understanding all sides of yourself so that you can grow into the fullest expression of who you're here to be, to live your potential, right? And so as you listen today, remember that the shadow is just the teacher, and you are so much more than your patterns. And with the more that you understand them, the more freedom that you can have to choose something new, to be in service to you, to step forward into that potential, right? So in this final part of this series, we're going to take a look at the 3 specific places where fear can live within the human design chart, and how those fears might not only show up in your business, but in your life. There are going to be discussions around the 3 centers, so ajna, solar plexus, and the spleen. And each of these is going to hold its own unique flavor of fear, right? So for the ajna, it's going to be fear of uncertainty. For the solar plexus, fear of emotional discomfort. And for the spleen, it's going to be fear of instability. And when they're running the show, especially running the show of your business, they may not show up as something that you fear, something that makes you clutch your pearls, but they can show up as patterns. They disguise themselves as perfectionism, as people pleasing, over preparing, overthinking, getting stuck in I don't know, and clinging possibly to what is maybe safe but just no longer serves you. So let's start with the first one, the ajna. The ajna is the center of mental processing and conceptualization. And when it's running on fear, it can create the shadow of the fear of false certainty. So in business, this becomes about perfectionism, about analysis paralysis, and the strategy obsession. What is the ajna center? Well, if you're looking at your chart, it would be the second upside down triangle, and it's right below the top one, which is the head center. Its function is for processing information, for forming opinions, for seeking clarity. And it's not a motor, or really, honestly, it's not even a decision-making center, except for we treat it like one when we're afraid. When we don't lean into our body, we lean into our mind and where we think we should be making decisions from. And in human design, ajna is there for insight or ideas, but it's not the space in which you make decisions to take action. So when the shadow shows up, it can show up as that fear of uncertainty. So I need to know more before I move. What if I'm wrong? I can't launch until I do more, or it all makes sense. The shadow says, I need to figure it out before I'm safe to act. The shadow says, I need to be certain. I need certainty. Then I'll be ready. But true clarity does not live in the ajna. True clarity lives in the body. And that's when we really tap into our strategy and our authority in human design to tell us how to respond to the world, how to interact our energy with the world, and let that be the decision-making factor. So if we were to look at some shadows that'll show up with this mental conceptualization center, it would be like over-researching your niche or your offer. Probably showing signs of constantly changing messaging, or that feeling of it's not quite right, never launching because things feel fuzzy. I mean, I can't, like, as I'm telling you these things, I'm thinking to myself how many times I've gotten stuck in these ideas, how many times I've let my shadow in the ajna be the one that is the decision-making partner in my business and really runs the show. Like getting stuck in those habits of asking, whether it's, your coach or your business partner, whatever, asking 100 questions before trusting yourself. If you've been on a coach call, I know you've seen that show up in people. Or needing something to be so clear, like a new roadmap instead of the one that you've been following because something doesn't feel right. There's many ways for it to show up. And so it can look like you're being productive. It can look like you're doing your due diligence. But it's fear. It's fear running the show. One thing we know is business is third line. And that means that business is about failing forward, trying new things, knowing that things are not always going to work out, and that's okay. It's about doing them and learning from those experiences so that we can actually learn from our experiences instead of fear because of our experiences. It's about deciding that we know it may not work, and then we do it anyway so that we can learn. Because in the end, what we will glean from that experience is going to be far more important than overthinking or getting stuck in procrastinating or analysis paralysis. So certainty to the ajna, it may feel safer. If I do the right thing, then I'll know I'm safe, right? Or if I'm wrong, what are people going to think? Or if I don't know what I'm saying, if I look confused, people are going to think I'm stupid. I mean, and maybe I'll think I'm stupid, right? You become addicted to this cycle, like this input. You need to get the input. And that can come from more books, more courses, templates, frameworks, because the confusion, it feels very dangerous to your nervous system. But I think it's important to really ask yourself, when those patterns start showing up, ask yourself, am I certain, or am I pretending to be certain when I'm not? And entrepreneurs will project clarity before they actually feel it. They will speak confidently, even if they're spinning internally, like kind of freaking out inside. They make quick decisions. You don't have to know in order to move, right? You just need to learn to trust you and trust the design and know that even if it's a mistake, you will learn from that mistake. Because what if confusion isn't a problem? What if uncertainty meant that you're just learning, you're evolving into this next version of you? Because honestly, you're not here to figure everything out before you take steps. That's not the way it works. You're here to express. You're here to experiment. You're here to respond, especially if you're a generator or a manifesting generator. Like, this is what you actually do. You respond to what's around you. So I want you to hear these 2 prompts. Just contemplate what is being asked in this space and think about how this shows up for you. What am I afraid might happen if I admit I don't know? Where am I overthinking instead of acting on what I already know? Okay, I'm going to ask one more because this one is really good. How might it feel to act before I know the whole picture? All right, so that is where the ajna, the fear, it's that conceptualization, it's the thinking. Now I want to move into the solar plexus. Because fear doesn't just live in our minds, friends. It also lives in our emotional body. The solar plexus creates a shadow around emotional discomfort. And that fear shapes how we lead, how we speak, and how we connect. The solar plexus is just below the ego center if you're looking. So if you're looking at the body graph, it's going to be on the bottom half, far right of the body graph, underneath the tiny little triangle, which is the ego center. And its function is for processing emotions, relationships, intimacy, and connection. This center, it works in different patterns. So people refer to when they're experiencing emotion, if they're defined in this area, they have what they call waves. They're emotional waves. It's not designed to be knowing things in the moment. It's about riding that wave, understanding that pattern to make decisions. In human design, this is one of the most misunderstood centers, I think, because it governs our feelings. And when I tell people that you have a defined emotional solar plexus, this is your center for emotional awareness, people are like, oh, emotional, yes, absolutely. Or especially if I'm referring to somebody that they're close with in their family, like, oh, well, this person has an emotional solar plexus. Emotional, definitely. But in human design, honestly, this is the space where our feelings are governed and where our culture tends to either suppress or over-identify with those feelings. And so the shadow, as it shows up, it can be like avoiding the emotional discomfort. This idea of just keeping the peace, or now is not the right time to say something, or I don't want to be too much, or what if people have a thought about me, right? What if they react badly based on something I say? This shadow is not about strategy. It's about emotionally surviving. And I think we're often afraid when it comes to business, we have this fear around failure. But I think those fears are deeper. I think we're afraid of things like rejection. We're afraid of disapproval. We're afraid of emotional chaos, losing love or losing respect, and even making others feel uncomfortable. So instead of stepping into a space of leadership, we self-abandon because we spend time in other people's minds thinking about how they're going to think about it, how they're going to react. And in business, that can be detrimental. It could be showing up as avoiding conflict, whether that's with your clients, with your team members, even with your audience. It could be holding back from saying the things that you really want to say. It could be keeping your prices low to avoid judgment or backlash. It could be about avoiding visibility during emotional low points. And also about overgiving or over apologizing to keep people happy. You become emotionally performative in your content that you're putting out there or in your client delivery. You'll be seen, but it's not going to be felt by your audience, by the people that your frequency is speaking to. So let's talk about why it feels safer. The solar plexus in fear will show up as emotions equal danger, especially other people's emotions equal danger. So something like, okay, let's just keep things light, don't rock the boat, don't trigger anything. I know you've all heard people make those comments. The problem is that it means that your truth just never fully gets expressed. You create safety for others, but abandon safety for yourself. And you don't know that you create safety for others. You just think you're creating safety for others by controlling what you're saying, while not believing that they're going to be able to emotionally handle what it is that you're saying. So you're not only, I think, abandoning yourself, but you're denying the ability of the other person to have their own emotional experience where they get to overcome their own shadows. So it can show up like you staying nice instead of being honest. And you could have really strong, deep feelings about things and then not share them, not show up as your authentic self. You wait for the perfect moment and it never comes. So how do you reframe this? I think knowing and understanding that you are not too much. You never were too much. And if that is playing in your mind, this is really something that you want to practice, knowing that you are exactly right. That having feelings, your feelings are not a flaw. And emotions come in waves or peaks and valleys or whatever, right? But we refer to that as being a wave that we've got to ride, but they're not warnings. You can feel discomfort without needing to fix it or give in to it or completely react to it. You can speak your truth and let people have their own feelings. Like, this is emotional maturity, especially in business. But this emotional maturity can speak volumes in relationships and life. So let's look at a few reflections. I want you to think of a place where you might be holding back because you're afraid of how people might react. List them out. Get honest about it. Tell the truth. Really dig in. Also, I want you to think this one. What would I say or do in my business if I wasn't worried about disappointing anybody? And then last, do I trust myself to stay steady in my emotional waves? Or am I just trying to avoid them altogether? Really think deeply about these. Emotional waves are tough because obviously we all have emotions and we're all going to have our own version of emotions. And not everybody is going to like our emotional experience. But we can't really know what's going on in the brain of others. So holding back who we are, and I'm not talking about emotional outbursts. I'm just talking about sharing what you want to share, being who you want to be, saying what you want to say. your expression of who you want to be in your business, it's important to show up as that version of you. That is your authenticity. So we've looked at the idea of how we conceptualize things from our ajna, that mental fear or uncertainty that can show up in the shadow. And in our solar plexus, we've looked at the emotional fear or discomfort. But there's still one more type of fear. And this is one that really shows up in me. I have got a lot of gates that are active in my spleen center. And this type of fear, this one runs deep. And that is, again, in our spleen. It is the instinctual or the primal fear center. And it's hardwired into us, and it is about survival. This fear says that anything that keeps us clinging to what's safe, that is better than stepping out and doing something else. The spleen is the body's oldest center, and it speaks the language of instinct or survival. And when fear is living here, like I said, it's primal. It says, this isn't safe. Don't change. Don't let go. And especially, it shows up like when you know things are no longer aligned, but the spleen is really trying to keep it alive. The spleen center is the complete opposite of the solar plexus. So if you're looking at the body graph, the solar plexus is on the right side, and that is the triangle that's facing left. Well, the spleen is on the left side, triangle facing right. Its function is survival, it's intelligence, it's about instincts, about your immune system. It's also about the fear of unknown. It governs our intuition. And it also holds our deep ancestral fear patterns. So the spleen is a big one. And it's not the center for logic or for emotion. It's the center for the whisper of our intuition. The one nudging, that instinct where something feels off or something tells you you're not safe right now. Like that is where those whispers come from. But when the spleen is conditioned by fear, that whisper gets distorted, and that can turn into paralysis or clinginess. So the shadow theme of the spleen, it's the fear of instability. What if I fail? What if it doesn't work? What if I let go and everything falls apart? So instead of moving forward, you cling to what's known, and that can be stuff that's expired, that no longer works. The business shadow of the spleen would look like, again, this comes up, and I'm telling you, it comes up a lot in human design and business, staying in a niche, in a program, or having a brand because it's safe. We're back to the niche drama, right? But it's staying there even if you have outgrown it, even if you know you've outgrown it. Or refusing to start something fresh. It's like that sunk cost idea, right? Even if you know it has drained you and you've put everything into it and you're completely uninspired by it, refusing to pivot, refusing to start over. Delaying hard decisions like firing somebody or hiring new people or leaving partnerships because it feels way too risky. But you know that either you can't keep doing it on your own or that the people that you have are no longer working and really causing problems. It can also look like holding back from visibility or expansion until everything is in the right place. Like, come on, we know that's not going to happen. And then in our health, it can show up as chronic health issues, energy crashes, as a way to avoid change. Ouch. That one, I think, shows up especially for entrepreneurs because we are responsible for everything that happens. And sometimes it's just easier to disconnect, right? Or to have something come up than it is to move forward. And I know that and maybe is not going to land with people, but we, as listening to the shadow and all the stuff that's coming up, remember, it lands with you or it doesn't, but you get to make your decisions. But we got to say what we got to say. The spleen will convince you that change is dangerous, even if staying is slowly draining your life force. Because it's constantly scanning for threats. The spleen is like that desire to keep you in the cave, right? So either these fears or threats, they could be real, they could also be imagined. It doesn't care. It doesn't care if you're aligned. It cares if you're safe. And familiar equals safe to this center in the body. So when you know it's time to change, when you decide, okay, I've got to make a change. I've got to pivot. The spleen is going to come up and say, "Whoa, let's just stay right there. Let's come on. This isn't great, but we know it's safe. We know this is all right. Just stay right there." Yeah. Stay in the cave. Don't go out there. There's lions, there's tigers, there's bears out there. Do not set foot out. You don't know what's going to happen. When that comes up, recognize it. Ask yourself, am I holding on to something because it feels safe, even if I know it's no longer aligned? Like, really decide to get into that. How can we reframe fear? Because the spleen isn't trying to sabotage you. That's not, like, it's not this big elaborate plan to make things not work. It's really just trying to protect you. Because it feels that growth isn't safe. But growth isn't safe. It's stretchy. It hurts. But your body learns a new safety, taking consistent action, moving you towards that alignment. You don't have to leap off a cliff, right? But you don't have to stop pretending that the cave is where you're meant to stay. You're not meant to stay there. We're not meant to stay safe. I know in one of the many Tony Robbins events that I've been to, the one thing he says that if you're not progressing, you're dying. The human being needs to make progress. It needs to grow. It needs to move. And if you're not doing that, you're dying. What parts of your business, I want you to think about these prompts. What parts of your business are you holding on to, even if they're not serving you anymore? All right, here's another one. If I knew I would be supported, what would I release or change right now? And then the last one, what's the cost of staying safe and not growing? All right, this episode, listen, this has been deep. It's been fun, but it has been deep. But there you have it, friends. That's the 3 centers of fear in human design. The ajna is the fear of uncertainty. The solar plexus is the fear of emotional discomfort. And the spleen is the fear of instability. Each of these powerful protectors, remember they are protectors. Each of them are there for a reason. But as much as they are protectors, they can also be quietly sabotaging your growth if you're not aware of them. When we start to see patterns, when we start to recognize patterns for what they are, it's just fear doing its job. Fear is there for a reason. But you also get to choose if you want to lean into fear or lean into growth. Like, feel the fear and do it anyway. You can choose differently. You can act from alignment instead of avoidance. You can act from truth instead of protection. If this episode resonated with you, I highly recommend going back and listening to parts 1 and 2, if you haven't, of the Shadow series. And to get the full picture of what is in your design and why it is so important to shine the light on these patterns. And if you want help identifying any of your own fear patterns and how they're showing up in your business, I would love to invite you to book the free Aligned Business Audit with me. I'll link how to do that in the show notes. Because when you can see how things are showing up in your business, when you can see these patterns, you can stop letting your business be run by these patterns. All right, friends, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.